by those who came before, the dream of a nation where freedom would endure. The work and prayers of centuries have brought us to this day. What shall be our legacy? What will our children say? Let them say of me, I was one who believed in sharing the blessings I received. Let me know in my heart when my days are through. America, America, I gave my best to you. Each generation.
My dad was PFC Howard McGee. He was inducted into the United States Army in February of 1942, 1 month after his 22nd birthday. He received his basic training at Fort Dixon, New Jersey. He was then assigned to the 2nd Battalion of the 20th Engineer Combat Regiment. Training as a combat engineer continued at Camp Blanding, Florida. One of my dad's jobs was to drive trucks and half-tracks, and you'll see him in some of the pictures. According to Lieutenant Colonel Truman Setliff, the commanding officer of the future 1340th, in June 1942, the 20th next moved to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, which was used as a staging area for units waiting to be shipped out to Europe. But the expected embarkation to England was canceled. Next, they moved to Camp Pickett, Virginia, to continue training, including amphibious assaults from floating craft to dry land. On September 30th, 1942, regimental headquarters in the 20th 1st Battalion returned to Camp Kilmer. On October 22nd, the 2nd Battalion left Camp Pickett for Newport News, Virginia, where they boarded the Hugh L. Scott and set sail for parts unknown. 1 week later, on November 1st, headquarters in the 1st Battalion of the 20th set sail out of New York Harbor. Somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, they were told that they would be part of an invasion of North Africa called Operation Torch. I think they must have been very surprised. Imagine the sight of the huge flotilla of Allied warships they saw assembling in the middle of the Atlantic. My dad came home from World War II with the pictures in this video and the booklet titled History of the 1340th Engineer Combat Battalion, which you'll find as a separate video posted on YouTube. Search for History of the 1340th Engineer Combat Battalion. One of my hopes in making this video is that people who had relatives who served in these units might see their picture and imagine some of what they experienced. No one has time to take pictures during combat, and you won't see much of that. But you will see some of the aftermath of war. I'll also add some history into this presentation so that you get a feel for the big picture of what was going on during the war. Unfortunately, my dad was never able to talk about his experiences in the war, which is not uncommon. So I never learned where these pictures were taken. I had to figure that out on my own. My dad would look at the pictures with me, but would only say a few words, like Catherine Pass and Huertgen Forest. He also mentioned seeing St. Lo in France, totally destroyed. Also, my dad never ate chicken again because he saw them pecking on dead bodies. When I asked him why the 1340th was sent to Czechoslovakia, after Germany, he said, chasing prisoners. That's all he said. War isn't like the movies. In war, you do things no human should have to do and see things no human should have to see. After that, you don't talk about it. Seeing your friends get killed isn't exactly a topic for casual conversation. You put those memories in a box in the back of your mind. Next, I'll give you a summary of the places the men of the 20th and 1340th Combat Engineers went. My dad wrote 6,650 miles at the top of this map, so I guess that's how far they traveled on this journey. I mentioned both units because throughout North Africa and Sicily, all of the men were only in one unit, the 20th. Before we talk about the 20th's travels through North Africa, we should talk about what combat engineers do in war. Basically, they construct and destruct. It's their job to clear paths for the infantry and armored units to move forward. That entails blowing up or clearing obstacles, disarming minefields, repairing or building roads, bridges, runways, harbors, or railroads, many times while under fire. That's what combat and the term combat engineers means. For these reasons, the combat engineers are one of the very first soldiers to go ashore during invasions. The next two pictures are from the 20th Combat Engineers website. They were taken during training at Fort Benning, Georgia in 1941. In the pictures, the engineers are building a pontoon bridge across the Chattahoochee River. The third picture came from the internet. It shows engineers sweeping for landmines during World War II. Of course, the really dangerous part comes next. They have to disarm the mines. Sometimes combat engineers are dedicated as infantry to reinforce the infantry units they're supporting. The invasion of North Africa was called Operation Torch. On November 8, 1942, the 20th Engineer Combat Regiment landed at the beach in Fidela, French Morocco. After spending 4 months in Casablanca rebuilding the harbor and unloading ships, the 20th began an 1,100-mile trek across the mountains and deserts of North Africa toward the front lines to support the infantry and armored units. First, a little background. Until the Americans landed in North Africa, the Allies in North Africa consisted of British Commonwealth troops. That's England, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, India, etc. However, the United States had been supplying military equipment to the Allies since 1940. The British had been fighting the Italians for control of North Africa since February of 1941. In February 1942, Hitler dispatched the famous General Erwin Rommel and his Afrika Korps to help the Italians gain control of North Africa and possibly gain control of the Suez Canal and the oil fields of the Middle East. This is Field Marshal Bernard L. Montgomery, commanding general of the British 8th Army in North Africa. He was known as Monty. He commanded the army from August 1942 until the victory in Tunisia, the final victory in the War of North Africa, in May 1943. He and General Rommel battled each other throughout North Africa. Monty was victorious over Rommel in the Second Battle of El Alamein, Egypt, giving the British their first major battlefield victory in World War II. This is Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding general of the German Afrika Korps. He was also known as the Desert Fox. Both he and Monty were decorated officers from World War I and excellent battlefield tacticians. Rommel commanded the Afrika Korps consisting of German and Italian forces. He was known as one of the ablest tank commanders of World War II. These two generals and their armies battled each other all over North Africa like a giant chess game in the desert for almost a year. At the same time that Allied troops landed in Operation Torch, in November of 1942, British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery was handing General Rommel his first defeat in the Second Battle of El Alamein in Egypt. In this picture, you see Field Marshal Montgomery observing his troops during the Second Battle of El Alamein. By February 1943, the Russian army had defeated the German army in the 5-month-long Battle of Stalingrad, one of the bloodiest battles in history. There were over 2 million total casualties. In this picture, you see Russian troops battling the German army in the ruins of Stalingrad. The tide of the war had now turned. In February of 1943, Rommel's first encounter with American troops was at the Kasserine Pass, Tunisia, which ended in a major defeat for the Americans. However, the Americans learned and made adjustments to become a more efficient fighting force. The Allies then beat Rommel and the Afrika Korps in Tunisia. The long 2 years of battles with the British and their allies had taken a toll on the Italians, Rommel, and his Afrika Korps. Now, with the addition of the Americans and the Allies' ability to resupply and control the sea and air, and the Germans' inability to resupply, the Allies had won the war in North Africa. The Germans abandoned North Africa. On March 9, 1943, Hitler called Rommel back to Germany. On May 13, 1943, the Afrika Korps surrendered to the Allies. Approximately 250,000 German and Italian soldiers were taken prisoner. They were exhausted and not interested in fighting anymore. So many prisoners were taken that the Allies had some of the prisoners build their own prison camps, including stringing the barbed wire. The battle for North Africa was now over. We'll discuss the travels of the 20th during the rest of the war in succeeding videos. While you look at these pictures of Morocco, I'll tell you more about Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. I was surprised to learn that the Allies didn't fight their way ashore against the Italians or the Germans. They actually fought against the forces of the French. It was called the French Vichy government. Germany and Italy provided additional naval support. This is how this odd turn of events occurred. After Germany overran France in June of 1940, an authoritarian French government known as the Vichy government was installed and signed an armistice with Germany to remain neutral. German forces occupied all of northern France, and the Vichy government retained sovereignty from the city of Vichy south. It was allowed to exist as long as it continued Germany's policies, remained neutral, maintained control of the French Navy, which was modern, and defended its territories, including colonies in North Africa, from invaders. Initially, the French put up a stiff resistance in North Africa, but their heart really wasn't in it. They weren't big fans of fighting for Germany. After 4 days, hostilities mostly ended, and the Vichy officials in North Africa surrendered and decided to fight for the Allies. Germany then quickly moved to occupy all of France. In response to this, the French Navy quickly scuttled the remainder of its fleet in Toulon, southern France, to prevent the ships from falling into the hands of the German Navy. There's a great classic movie titled Casablanca with Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, Claude Rains, among others. It takes place in Casablanca shortly before the Allied invasion of North Africa. If you've seen that movie and ever wondered why the French police captain Louis Renault seemed, at least half-heartedly, to be working for the German officer Major Strasser, now you understand why. The French, at least the Vichy French, were not always our allies. In the beginning of the video, I mentioned that while at Camp Kilmer, the invasion of Europe was cancelled. Joseph Stalin had implored Roosevelt and Churchill to invade Europe to take pressure off the Eastern Front where the Russians were fighting Germany alone. However, Roosevelt and Churchill decided to invade North Africa first. I think there were several reasons for this. First, I think that Germany was not expecting this. Imagine, hundreds of ships made it across the Atlantic to Africa without being discovered and attacked. Second, the Allies would be attacking the Vichy French, not the Germans, head-on. There was considerable intelligence that the French would be much more unwilling to fight the Allies. After all, Germany had invaded their country. Third, if successful, the Mediterranean would be under Allied control, cutting off routes to resupply the Germans and Italians, and denying them the oil fields and the Suez Canal. This is a map of Operation Torch. I'm going to describe it further because it's not as well known as the Invasion of Normandy, and also because it'll help you understand some of the pictures that follow. When I researched it, I was surprised at how large the battle actually was, and also that such a large fleet had made it all the way across the Atlantic undetected. General Dwight Eisenhower was the commander of all Allied forces in North Africa. General George Patton was the commander of the Western Task Force that landed in Morocco. As you can see, the invasion forces landed at a total of 9 beaches throughout Morocco and Algeria. The goal was to capture Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers. The Center and Eastern Task Forces were combined American and British Commonwealth operations. In the interest of time, I won't discuss those now since the 20th only landed at Fidela, the city closest to Casablanca and the most heavily defended. Military intelligence had indicated that the French ground forces were sympathetic to the Allies and might not resist the invasion. Various contacts had been made with Vichy French leaders previously to try to convince them to join the Allies, but they resisted. However, French Admiral of the Fleet, François Darlan, had also refused to turn the French fleet over to the Germans. They tried to remain neutral, even though Germany was essentially holding all of France hostage, including 2 million captured French soldiers in forced labor in Germany. In fact, though, there had been rebellions within the ranks of the French ground forces in the days leading up to the Allied invasions. The Western Task Force alone, trying to capture Casablanca, consisted of 102 ships, including 2 aircraft carriers, 3 battleships, many cruisers, destroyers, and troop ships. There were 35,000 soldiers, consisting of 2 infantry divisions and 1 armored division. The Americans ran onto the beach on November 8th carrying a large American flag, hoping that the French would not fire. They were wrong. The troops were bombed, shot at, and strafed by fighter planes. Battles, including sea battles, continued for about 4 days. The attack went a little easier at Oran and Algiers. After an intense battle, Algiers surrendered to the Eastern Task Force on November 8th. Oran surrendered to the Central Task Force on November 9th, and on November 10th, French Admiral François Darlan officially ordered the French forces to cease fire, although all did not immediately comply. Casablanca finally surrendered on November 11th. On November 12th, German U-boat U-130 sank the USS Hugh L. Scott, the troop ship that carried the 2nd Battalion of the 20th from Virginia to Fidela. Amazingly, I found this picture on the internet of the exact moment the Hugh L. Scott was torpedoed. It was torpedoed on November 12, 1942, so apparently the 12 and 11 in this picture got transposed. If this U-boat had found the Hugh L. Scott a few days earlier, the pictures in this presentation wouldn't exist, and I probably wouldn't either. It also sank the troop ships USS Tasker and USS Edward Rutledge. Fortunately, the ships had already offloaded the troops. However, 74 ship crewmen were killed in these attacks. In all, there were 100,000 Allied ground forces and 300 Allied warships in Operation Torch. Final casualty figures were approximately 500 killed or missing and approximately 700 wounded. If you'd like to learn more about World War II, check out this website, www.2db.com. That's where I found a lot of information and pictures. If you'd like to know firsthand what it was like to participate in the war, look at the veterans' testimonies on the Wavy Arrow website that I've shown here. I used their testimonies to write some of the script for this video. In the column on the left side of the Wavy Arrow website page, click on World War II. When you get to the World War II section of the website, you can find more by clicking on the box that says Newsletters for World War II Veterans. I also recommend that you buy the book Chappie, World War II Diary of a Combat Chaplain. Chaplain Carpenter, Chappie as he was known by his men, was the chaplain of the 20th and 1340th Engineer Combat Battalions, from the invasion of North Africa all the way to the end of the war. In this book, you'll find the diary that Chappie kept of his almost daily experiences in World War II. You have no idea what it was like to be in World War II until you read this book. Chaplain Carpenter's daughter, Anne Eland, generously gave me permission to use information found in their book. By the way, a little bit of trivia that I learned from this book. Did you know that chaplains had some of the highest casualty rates of all soldiers in World War II? If you read this book, you'll understand why. Okay, now it's time to see some pictures. This picture is one I found on the internet of the American forces led by General Patton actually landing on the beach of Fidela, French Morocco with a large American flag. If you look closely, you can see the armband each man wore on his left arm. It's also an American flag. The hope was that the French soldiers wouldn't shoot. Unfortunately, they did. There were some casualties caused by strafing and bombing. After the fighting was over, the next job for the 20th was to unload ships in the small port of Fidela. They stayed in Fidela for about 5 days. After 5 days, they boarded a train for Casablanca. I'm fairly certain that's where this picture was taken. You can see the train tracks. And yes, it can be warm enough to go to the beach in Morocco in November. When the troops got to Casablanca, they first camped at a racetrack outside the city called the Hippodrome. While at the Hippodrome, they were entertained by the American comedian Martha Raye. That's where this picture was taken. Unfortunately, you can't really see who's on stage. Later, they apparently moved into more comfortable digs because the 20th was going to be staying in Casablanca for a while to get the harbor up and running again, and then to unload ships. On December 30th, they had a German bombing raid over Casablanca. It lasted about 3 hours. Fortunately, there were no casualties among the troops, although some civilians did get killed. They also ended up with a few holes in their tents. This is Gare del Pi, the way it's pronounced in French. Gare means station or depot. So this is basically the port of Casablanca where the men worked. Chaplain Carpenter's diary has an entry dated December 16, 1942. He says that getting the port operational has been a major undertaking. RGIs have worked endlessly on this project, clearing out the sunken ships, removing wreckage, repairing warehouses, restoring railroad tracks, filling bomb craters like the ones you see in this picture, and building an extension to the unloading platform. No medals will be given to these engineers for completing such a monumental task in such a relatively short time, but they deserve one. Here are some of the guys taking a break from their port duties to pose for a picture. Unloading ships does have its advantages. Chaplain Carpenter wrote that Christmas dinner in 1942 was pretty good. They had real turkey with all the trimmings. And then they also managed to find a radio transmitter that was supposed to go to a radio station in the Midwest United States, somehow found its way to the docks in Casablanca. So they set up their own radio station. Fortunately, one man was an MIT electrical engineering professor, and another one was Andre Baruch, a top CBS announcer. And together they created their own radio station. Word is that it was a big hit with all the troops in North Africa. These are bands of machine gun bullets. It looks like their duties also included loading ammo boxes for machine guns. In addition to unloading ships, the 20th also had the assignment to prepare the venue and provide security for the Casablanca Conference of the Allies, which took place from January 14th through the 24th. The most notable attendees were Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. Future French President General Charles de Gaulle, leader of the Free French Resistance, was also there, along with representatives from Russia and the other Allied nations. Joseph Stalin could not attend because of the continuing battle in Stalingrad. The event was held at the Anfa Hotel in Casablanca, which is still there today. The conference was held to plan for the coming year of war and to open another front to fight the German army, to take pressure off the Russian army fighting on the Eastern Front. One of the major decisions made at this conference was that the Allies would accept nothing short of unconditional surrender. So the battle was on. This is a picture of the Anfa House on the grounds of the Anfa Hotel. President Roosevelt stayed here during the Casablanca Conference. There's a humorous veterans account on the Wavy Arrow website told by Francis Knorr, Company A of the 20th. One night at 2:30 a.m., he was on guard duty when someone appeared at the gate. He ordered him to halt and clicked off the safety of his rifle. The unexpected visitor identified himself as the Secretary of State, but he didn't know the password. The captain rushed out of the villa yelling, "Sentry, don't shoot!" The captain explained to Secretary of State Cordell Hull that the sentry was only doing his duty and that if he stayed out late thereafter, he would have to know the password. From the sentry's point of view, when you're guarding the lives of Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, you don't take any chances. I'm sure the Secretary of State always knew the password after that. Thanks to the miracle of modern computers, I was able to enhance this picture with my desktop computer. And I saw the number 632 on the bow. I even saw sailors lined up on the deck. So I was able to identify this ship as the USS Cowie. It's one of the destroyers that escorted the fleet across the Atlantic during Operation Torch and escorted a number of convoys across the Atlantic after that. In July, the ship also provided fire support for the invasion of Sicily. A couple more of the pictures our photographer took in Casablanca. One is this bus station, and also the post office in Casablanca, which I was able to identify from the internet because it still looks like this today. And this appears to be a movie theater based on the words Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. The ship you're looking at here is the French battleship Jean Bart. It has an interesting history. It was under construction and almost complete when Germany invaded France. To keep the ship out of German hands, the ship was sailed to Casablanca for completion. During Operation Torch, the ship was used by the Vichy French as a shore battery against the Allied invasion. It fired on troops, Allied ships, and got into a battle with the battleship USS Massachusetts. The Massachusetts hit it several times and thought the Jean Bart was out of commission. However, the French were able to make it operable again overnight. The next day, the Jean Bart surprised the heavy cruiser USS Augusta, nearly hitting it with a salvo. In response, the USS Ranger sent 9 Dauntless dive bombers and 8 F-4F Wildcats to attack the ship. 2 1,000-pound bombs sank the ship at the dock. Again, this is just a small part of a very large naval battle that took place. After the war, the Jean Bart was repaired and became part of the French fleet again. It was in the French fleet until 1970 when it was finally scrapped. During the battle, the port of Casablanca was bombed. 3 Vichy French passenger ships were hit: the SS Porthos, Savoy, and Lipari. After looking at pictures of the ships on the internet, I was able to identify this ship as the Porthos based on the design of the mast. One of the ironies of selling weapons to other countries is that sometimes those weapons are used against you. This is a P-36 Curtiss Hawk. We sold quite a few to the French before World War II, and then, of course, the Vichy French inherited these and used them against us in North Africa. This is a Grumman F-4F Wildcat. It was part of Navy Squadron VF-28, I was able to figure out from the number there, and it was flown from the deck of the USS Suwannee during Operation Torch. This is a Douglas DB-7, also known as an A-20 Havoc. This was also part of the planes that we sold to the French government before World War II and later came under the control of the Vichy French. Apparently this one survived Operation Torch in pretty good condition. However, we can't say the same about this one. Nor can we say the same about these. The large aircraft that you see in the picture is a Breguet BRE-521 long-range reconnaissance flying boat belonging to the Vichy French. It's a pretty old design even for World War II. It was built to meet French Navy specifications for a long-range flying boat in 1932. February 21st, 1943 brings news of a massive defeat for U.S. Army II Corps troops at the Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. It's time for the 20th to leave the relative peace of Casablanca and head to the front. I think the guys must have been sorry to leave Casablanca. Although they worked hard, Casablanca was a beautiful modern city. I got these 2 pictures from the internet. The first one is from a website, www.online.org, and the second one is from Pinterest. On March 14, 1943, orders were issued that all unit identification signs on equipment, vehicles, field location signs were to be removed and replaced with a code symbol, one that would not be discernible by the enemy. Each unit would design its own symbol. Colonel Caffey, the commanding officer of the 20th, announced the symbol would be the red wavy arrow. It's still used to this day as the symbol used on the 20th Combat Engineers equipment. Here you can see it in use in Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom, which began in 2003. The guys liked Colonel Caffey. He was strict but fair. In one of his addresses to the troops during training back in the States, he said, "Just remember one rule: do what the man says." On the morning of March 15th, they're on their way in a 17-mile convoy with other American units. I was able to identify this bridge as the Al-Uid Sharat Bridge, which is on the road from Casablanca to Rabat, Morocco. It was built in 1917 and still stands today. Here's a picture of it in more recent times. I found this picture on Wikipedia. They passed many local people with their pack animals along the way. On the morning of March 17th, they left Meknes, Morocco, headed east over the Atlas Mountains. Chaplain Carpenter, Chappie as he was known, remarked that this is some of the most beautiful country he'd ever seen, with the snow-covered peaks of the Atlas Mountains and a fertile valley, dotted with wheat fields and almond trees. This is possibly where this picture was taken. While I was experimenting with the computer to enhance this picture, suddenly the snow-capped mountains in the background popped out. That's when I realized that this picture was taken in North Africa. Starting March 18th, the convoy started to travel at night over treacherous and steep mountain roads with no headlights. They had to avoid being spotted by enemy planes. Their only guide was the small red light on the vehicle in front. They passed from Morocco into Algeria just before dawn, stopping at Tlemcen, Algeria. If you look at pictures of these places on the internet, they're quite beautiful. On March 20th, they arrived in Algiers. I'm going to guess this is where this picture was taken. It's a fairly large city, and from the design of his cap, the guard is obviously French. The next picture could also be Algiers, Tunis, Tunisia, or even Palermo in Sicily, judging from the palm trees. As they leave Algiers, German bombers began dropping bombs on the city. They got out just in time. March 21st finds them still traveling parallel to the Mediterranean Sea toward the front lines. Now they're in the British sector and get tea and delicious Algerian oranges for rations. Chappie continues to describe this beautiful land of deep gorges, waterfalls, and valleys, carpeted with white daisies and purple flowers. They're also still driving on treacherous mountain roads at night with only blackout lights. The moon lights up the snow on the surrounding mountains. On March 23rd, the final destination of the convoy is announced. It's Tabessa, Algeria, the same place where the Germans made their fatal Kasserine Pass attack. As they approach Tabessa on March 29th, they see the evidence of the battle that took place. Everywhere there are burned out tanks, trucks, planes, and German graves like the ones you see here. When the Germans left, they destroyed the train tracks and sowed the desert with thousands of mines, which the 20th now has the nerve-wracking job of disarming. Teller mines are powerful enough to flip a tank. Smaller S mines are designed to kill individuals. They're also known as bouncing Bettys. They have very small, almost invisible triggers. When triggered, they spring out of the ground and explode in your face. Abandoned mines aren't just dangerous to soldiers, they're also a terrible danger to the civilians who live here. Don't misunderstand though, all armies plant mines, including the United States Army. It's done to slow down the progress of advancing enemy armies. On March 31st, the men of the 20th found out that landmines weren't the only problem left behind by this retreating army. Booby traps also became a problem. The young rookie GI came upon a disabled German Jeep like the one you see here. Before anyone could stop him, he opened the door, triggering an explosion which killed him immediately. On April 17th, the BBC announced that General Patton was being called back to England and General Omar Bradley would be replacing him as commanding officer of II Corps. Apparently Patton was called back to prepare for the invasion of Sicily. I found this picture on eBay. On the far right is General Patton, in the center is General Omar Bradley, and on the far left is General Courtney Hodges, who would command the First Army. I would guess that this picture was taken somewhere hot, like North Africa, judging by the lack of clothing. Apparently this picture of my dad and the guys with their half-truck was taken after Patton left. Patton would have had a fit if he had seen them out of uniform. He was a real stickler for men being in uniform, even in combat in the desert. The night of April 19th finds them driving again on treacherous mountain roads with no lights, close to the front lines. They can see the flashes from artillery. Unfortunately, one of the motorcycle messengers like this one drove off a cliff in the darkness and was killed. April 23rd finds the regiment near Jabal Abiyad, Tunisia, and is again disarming minefields while being shelled by the German army. The men are under constant attack now. When they hear a shell coming, they hit the deck. As soon as the smoke clears, the medics come in and tend to the wounded, and the uninjured men get back to work. Chaplain Carpenter says it's an amazing thing to see the bravery of these men. I got the group picture from Reddit.com, and the other two pictures were from Pinterest.com. The heavily armed German army is entrenched on the slopes of the mountains. You can see the snow-capped mountains in the distance. The Allies' artillery and tanks aided the infantry in driving them out. It was a tough fight. As the 20th travels, it passes more German graves, and sometimes American ones too, their dog tags hanging from some sort of marker, sounding like a wind chime in the breeze. The Quartermaster Corps will disinter the bodies of the American soldiers later, and reinter them in a permanent U.S. cemetery for war dead in Carthage, Tunisia. That's where this picture was taken on Memorial Day 2020. Even though it's 80 years later, thousands of miles away, they're still not forgotten. What I've learned from Chaplain Carpenter's book, and from the accounts of other veterans, is that whether you come back from a war physically intact, or wounded, or killed, It's mostly a matter of luck. You're in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's so much metal flying around in the war zone, both enemy and friendly, that you can be alive 1 second and dead the next, never knowing what hit you. Bombs, artillery shells, grenades, shrapnel, snipers, landmines, booby traps, and even friendly fire. Sure, experience plays a part by getting to know the dangerous sights and sounds of the battlefield, and how to move and work with your fellow soldiers, but you also need a lot of luck. On May 7th, infantry and armor from 2 Corps enters Bizerti, while the British forces take Tunis. The picture on the screen now was taken during the battle. The next picture is one that my dad brought home, which was taken after the battle was over. In an amazing stroke of luck, I stumbled across the first picture on the internet, taken at the exact spot that my dad's picture was taken. Now I know for sure that the pictures were taken in Bizerti. On May 9th, the 20th enters Bizerti. It's their job to clear out the enemy stragglers. When Colonel Caffey and Major White come under fire, 2 of the 20th's men manage to shoot the snipers, killing one and wounding the other. On May 10th, Bizerti is firmly in Allied hands, and the engineers have been tasked with repairing the airport and clearing the main streets. The city of 40,000 is in ruins. The 20th is the first American unit to hoist the American flag over Bizerti. The battle for North Africa is over. There were many more battles in North Africa than I've discussed in this video. I've only told the story of the 20th Engineer Combat Regiment. May 14th finds thousands of German and Italian soldiers driving their own trucks with white flags surrendering. Due to the Allies' control of the sea and air at this point, the Axis supply lines have been cut and the Axis soldiers are exhausted. In addition, General Rommel had been called back to Germany. The Allies were overwhelmed with approximately 250,000 prisoners. In this picture you see an American soldier inspecting some of the artillery turned over by the Axis soldiers who had surrendered. On May 28th, the men received word that Colonel Caffey has been transferred to lead a special combat engineer unit. The men are very disappointed to hear this. They have a tremendous amount of respect for Colonel Caffey. Not only that, but the faint hope of going home is now gone, because on May 30th, the 20th is ordered to support the 34th and 3rd Divisions and move to the south of Bizerti for assault training. That could only mean one thing: another invasion. Exactly where is still a secret at this point. Intelligence reports suggest that there could be up to 6 enemy divisions in the area where they are landing. That's possibly 90,000 to 120,000 of the enemy. Around May 30th, the replacement for Colonel Caffey arrives. He's Colonel Richard Arnold, a recent member of General Eisenhower's staff in London. This is his picture. West Point graduate, class of 1932. On June 6th, there's a loud explosion. Colonel Arnold was examining a German mine when it exploded, killing him instantly. It exploded when the lieutenant he was with stepped on a concealed tripwire. The lieutenant suffered compound fractures of both legs and feet. Chappie said he'll never get accustomed to eating breakfast with a man in the morning and burying him before noon. It's happening much too often. On June 24th, a new commanding officer arrives. His name is Colonel Daly. He remained the CO of the 20th, and later the 20th and the 1340th, until the end of the war. Colonel Daly was also a graduate of West Point, class of 1928. The only pictures I could find of Colonel Daly were in Chappie's book, and they're pictures of them in happier times, playing a little tennis at the end of the war in Czechoslovakia. Approximately around June 21st, there's a break in the invasion training. Possibly it's at this time that some of the men went to nearby Tunis, Tunisia. That's where this picture was taken. When I computer enhanced the picture, I was able to see the word Tunis on one of the buildings in the distance. This is a beautiful color picture I found on the internet. American troops in North Africa somewhere, Tunisia or Libya, it said, 1943. The men are able to get some fresh fruit, nuts, vegetables, and ice. The engineers were even able to make ice cream. On June 28th, the men board an LCI landing craft to practice landing on the beach. They landed just before dark the next day and then hiked a long 16 miles in desert heat to their camp. This is a picture of an LCI. The actual LCI they rode on was number 229. It's a picture of it in Chappie's book. The acronym LCI stands for Landing Craft Infantry, as opposed to, say, LST, which stands for Landing Ship Tank. An LST is designed to carry both armor, like tanks, and also infantry. On July 4th, they had a special memorial service to honor all of their buddies and fellow service members who died in North Africa since landing in Morocco 8 months before. This is another view of the American Military Cemetery in Carthage, Tunisia, for American servicemen killed in North Africa. There are 2,841 servicemen buried here. In addition, there are 3,724 servicemen missing in action. Between March 31st and July 5th, when the 20th finally left North Africa to invade Sicily, the 20th lost 9 officers and 17 men, and many more wounded, mostly due to mines and booby traps. However, they disarmed approximately 200,000 mines during their time in North Africa. The 20th Engineer Regiment's tour of duty in North Africa was now over. Check out part 2 of this video to see what the Wavy Arrow Combat Engineer's next assignment would be. I hope you enjoyed this video and saw someone you knew, but don't tune out yet. There are more pictures of the men of the 20th Combat Engineer Regiment, followed by the credits for this video.
She lays awake in a silent room, holding his picture washed silver by the moon. Oceans away, he feels her sigh. So alone in the world tonight. A soldier, that nameless, faceless one, a young girl's lover, a baby's father, some mother's son. Too young to know his daddy's gone. He hears them say his mother must be strong. So he pretends like children do. He likes to stand in his daddy's shoes. Closes her eyes and sees him at 3. In her mind, that's the age he'll always be. And only God understands her love. Now she prays to the angels up above.